Do you struggle with intrusive thoughts and overthinking? Well, this video is all about how to end what I call worry thoughts, those repetitive, insistent, and almost abusive style of thoughts where we feel attacked by our thinking. Hello, my name is Jesse and welcome to the channel Open Source Owners, where we talk about what if humans had an owner's manual. Let's get into it. You have 60 to 80,000 thoughts a day, and 90% plus of those are actually subconscious, or what I call programmed thinking. Those are not thoughts that you're consciously choosing to have. Those are thoughts that are sort of like repetitive patterns that just keep showing up. And you got to start to wonder, where did that programming come from? If I'm not choosing these thoughts, where did the installation process happen? Well, most programming of thoughts and of thought patterns, as well as of self-image and self-worth, come from the ages of 0 to 7, childhood, basically. And what's going on in the child brain is very fascinating, because the child brain, your brain when you were a child, my brain when I was a child, every child's brain is in what's called the theta brainwave state, which is a certain frequency pattern that you can measure of electrical activity of the brain. But this is often referred to as the open channel. This is why children learn things so well. This is why it's the best time to teach your child how to play piano or speak multiple languages, because they're in this open, receive, non-judgmental, whatever you're presenting to them, the child just says, okay, that's how it is, and maps their little neural networks together so that they can do those things really effectively, very quickly, without really having to be critical about it, or without having other frames of how they understand reality that get in the way. The alpha brainwave state allows us choice about emotions and thoughts for the first time. So what happened in those early childhood years, 0 to 7, really set you up to have these incessant thoughts that you didn't choose. So if you struggle with worry-based thinking or intrusive-based thinking, I would say almost 100% of the time, those thoughts are going to have arised from, the origin of them is before you were 7. But now you're watching this video, presumably you're older than 7 years old, we can actually begin to choose which types of thoughts we have and which types of emotions we have, or maybe more importantly, how we relate to our thoughts and emotions. So in the therapy world, there are techniques like cognitive diffusion or mindfulness or meditation or metacognition, which we'll talk about that one in a second, as ways to gain control over and even eventually silence the incessant mind, or what is sometimes called the monkey mind, the brain that just keeps thinking, especially those people who feel like they're being intruded upon. Their quality of life is actually being disturbed by those thoughts that are coming in. Just keeping in mind that these techniques were not available to you before 7, and you didn't learn them in high school or college, probably. So it might be something that as an adult, you have to then learn sort of like how to take the training wheels off the mind and the emotional experience of being a human, and really begin to gain sort of adult control, adult sovereignty over our thinking and our emotions. Okay, so your thoughts in large part really, are driven by your attachment style, or what we refer to as attachment wounding, which sets up your attachment style. So if you're interested in attachment, if you click the link below, I will link you to a quiz, a free quiz that you can take online to determine your attachment style. Attachment styles develop in the child by age 2. So really it's 6 months to age 2 is when this long-term sustainable network in your brain and pattern in your nervous system gets developed and you carry with you. And it's that pattern within our nervous system that we really refer to when we're talking about subconscious. Like, oh, your thoughts are subconscious. Well, it just means that they're running on programs that are really fast, faster than the conscious brain, and that were set up at a really, really young age. Attachment styles are linked to things like abuse. That could be emotional abuse, that could be verbal abuse, that could be any type of perceived abuse as the child, and really importantly, childhood emotional neglect. Other patterns such as learning that we as a child must appease and soothe our parents instead of the other way around, which is how it should be. But many of us learn that, hey, if mom's upset, if mom's anxious, I am also anxious, so I'm going to try to sort of like put my needs aside. As a little child, you're learning this, and instead make sure that mom's needs are met. And there could be various traumas at this time that could result or influence your attachment style, from medical traumas to car accidents to any type of other social shaming that could occur. Many things that happen at this time get stuck get lodged into the memory banks of the nervous system and the brain that we call the subconscious. Not to be forgotten, this is also the primary age where your microbiome, the collection of bacteria, protozoa, viruses, spores, non-human entities, develops in your gut particularly, but also your skin and throughout your whole body. And the quality of your microbiome can actually determine and actually drive particularly obsessive or OCD type thoughts, can be driven from bacteria. That's right, that is possible. So when we talk about mental health and dealing with intrusive thoughts, we also have to think about the biological domain. We're going to talk more about that in this video at the end, but the idea is the biological domain is separate from the psychological domain. It's not about the abuse or the trauma, etc. It's more about like, hey, you didn't have a fully developed microbiome, or you had a bunch of antibiotics at a young age and it wiped out your developing microbiome. Having vaginal birth versus cesarean section, being breastfed versus not being breastfed, those things actually determine the quality and the health and the robustness of your microbiome. Okay, let's go over 2 particular steps that we could take to really ending these intrusive thoughts, these obsessive thoughts, and worry-based thinking, okay? Now, these aren't the only things, but if you were to practice these 2 things, it would take you a long distance toward regaining control and beginning to have thoughts that you choose. And not only thoughts, but emotional patterns that you're choosing. Step number 1 is what we call metacognition. Metacognition just means becoming aware of the types of thoughts that you're having, simply, period. Just becoming aware of it. And then, of course, we get to interplay with those thoughts. But the first step is in metacognition is developing practices within our lives that allow us to become aware of the type of frameworks that we're viewing the world through, which would include our attachment style, our trauma history, etc. We start to become aware, like, hey, I didn't even choose that thought. That thought was sort of implanted into my brain when I was a young kid because of blah, blah, blah. Right? So that's the idea of metacognition. Now, one of the practices for this is to simply get into the habit of it. And what's great about this habit is it travels and it can go with you anywhere, is get into the habit of labeling your thinking. When you notice you're having thoughts, just label it thinking. This is the idea of separating you at a fundamental level from your thoughts. They are not the same thing. One of which was programmed, the other of which is here now in the moment, right? So the next step of this could be like a mindfulness step where you label thinking, but then you engage in your senses and you start to understand, okay, the wind is blowing, there's a tree, there's a yellow car, I'm talking to my partner, whatever the case may be. You start to orient again into concrete reality where you're actually at now. And again, this isn't a disidentification process. Another example of like a mantra is you could just say, that's a thought. And you might do this multiple times and it might be frustrating. It doesn't get rid of the thought immediately, but it's a practice where you can disidentify from the thinking. In acceptance and commitment therapy, they talk about strategies for this where we can speed thoughts up
and say them really, really, really fast over and over and over again.
And so it just becomes sort of a blur of words or sounds. It doesn't become the thought anymore with the emotional weighting. It actually turns into something else. Or you can slow the thoughts way down.
And so you're saying them at a ridiculously slower level.
And again, that helps you sort of like disconnect from the thought being true or being something that you have to believe in and turning it more into just like, hey, it's just a thing. It's just something that is happening to me and I can learn why. But in the moment, I get to play with it because in the moment, I get that choice channel. I have that alpha brainwave state where I can open up to choices. If you want to know more, look up cognitive diffusion strategies. There's a bunch of them and you can try a bunch. Now, my suggestion to you is just pick a few. Maybe from this video or maybe from other videos, just pick a few that you think will work and then practice those for some period of time so that you can actually establish a neural network. And then you can see if it works or not. Don't just try it for a day and then try another one for a day. That's not the way that these things will actually work. Over time, we want to prune our neural networks and change them to be beneficial. And that just simply takes time. So I'm sorry, there's no super shortcut to this. It's something that requires you to work with your own mental neural networks in your brain. And lastly, I'll say for metacognition, if you want a simple daily practice, a concentration meditation is one of the best practices I know of. This is just simply 5 minutes or less a day, sitting in a still place, in a calm place, maybe outside, maybe inside, and just working with your mind in the metacognitive way that we're talking about. You could boil this down to the most simple thing of all. It's just to sit, focus on an object. It could be the breath, it could be a tree, doesn't matter. Focus on that object, and then just label thinking every time a thought pops up in your brain. And that's it. So you just say thinking, and then return your focus to the breath or to the tree. Pick an object, label thinking, set a timer for 5 minutes. That's all you got to do for a concentration meditation. And that is a metacognitive practice. Step number 2 is consciously reprogramming your mind. Not just practicing the neutral practice of, say, thinking or thoughts, but actually trying to install the new thoughts that you'd prefer to have. And this practice is best done through what we call positive affirmations. Now, everybody's probably heard of positive affirmations, but the key to them is to making them sort of personalized, not just like reading a book about positive affirmations, but try to say like, hey, when I have this type of thought, what I'd want to say instead is this type of thought. And then that is your positive affirmation that you then get to practice and change over time. Couple keys here. Try to make it present tense only. And I'll give you some examples in a second. Keep it in the affirmative. So it's not about I will not do this. It's more about I am doing this or I will do that. Say them out loud to yourself if you can do that. And try to say it from a heart-brain coherence. If you want to look up heart-brain coherence, you can learn more about that on YouTube here. But basically, it's about just making sure that you're connected to the heart center and the brain is sort of purposely being connected to the heart. So you can do that through heart-focused breathing. You can just simply concentrate on the heart space. But you want to try to make it a coherent system here. And this will actually help align your nervous system with your cognitive system. Here are some examples. I live my life in abundance. I have everything that I need. Perfect. It's present tense. You say it out loud. Maybe that's a particular thought that you really want to have. I am calm and patient and respect myself. Perfect. I never betray my intuition. Now you might, but that's the positive affirmation is something you're aspiring to. You're trying to get your brain there. And lastly, I maintain balance between thoughts and actions. And you can change these any old way you want. You can swap out words, but you notice how it's in the present tense and it's very sort of personalized, maybe to particular thoughts that you have. And then we say them out loud with a coherence between heart and brain. Super critical message here. Do not stop any of these skills. Say you pick up a concentration meditation. You're like, okay, I'm going to try that. Don't quit it before at least 21 days go by, maybe even as long as 45 days or 60 days. And that's just based on what we know about habit formation, behavior change, and what it all comes down to, neuroscience, how the neural networks actually begin to link up and become fused and solidified and faster and smoother over time. It just takes that amount of repetition. The strategy is do very small bite-sized chunks every day for many days in a row, 21 days in a row, let's say, rather than spend an hour, every day doing something. So the good news is you only have to do these positive affirmations or concentration meditation practices for about 5 minutes a day. The bad news is you want to try to do it every day. You might skip a day here and there, but you don't want to miss several days in a row for 21 to 45 to 60 days. That's when you'll actually begin to notice the change and the positive effect. I've had many clients say to me, oh, it didn't work. I tried the breathing or I tried the positive affirmation and it didn't work. And I'll say something along the lines of like, well, how long did you do it for? And they'll say like, well, a couple hours or a couple days. It's like, well, you quit too early. These patterns were fused into you. It took 6 months. It took 2 years. It took 7 years for these intrusive thoughts to be fused into you. It's going to take some time for it to be unwired. Now, if you want a little bit of partnership, a little bit of mentorship in your mental health journey, consider joining the program that I call the Holistic Owner's Manual, the home subscription service. The reason is because we can get into these things in a more systematic, more step-by-step pattern than we can on these random YouTube videos. I love YouTube videos. I watch a ton of them, and they are awesome, but they're often not sort of personalized or sequenced in a way that makes a whole lot of sense in a bigger picture. This program is really designed around the 4 domains that you see listed here: the biological, the social, the spiritual, and the psychological. We spend about 3 months on each domain, and we do so over weekly emails and then monthly coaching calls. So that is the program. If that seems interesting to you, if that seems like something that you want, a little bit of mental health mentorship, so you're not just out there trying to do it on your own, well, then consider this program. This would be a great addition to a therapy practice, or if you have no treatment whatsoever for mental health struggles, this would be a great sort of low-cost entry place where you can experiment with a lot of things and get a little bit of personalized mentorship. That was Intrusive Thoughts and Overthinking, How to End Worry Thoughts. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you made it all this way, please go ahead and comment. What stood out to you the most? What struggles are you having? What type of thoughts are you really struggling to sort of overcome? Let us know in the comments, and I would love to read that. Until the next video, thanks so much for watching. Take care of yourselves out there.